You're standing in a forest. It's maybe 50,000 BC. You haven't eaten since yesterday. Your legs hurt. Your stomach is making sounds that would concern a doctor. And then, through the branches, you see it. A cluster of dark, ripe berries just hanging there in the sun, completely unarmed, asking for it. You don't think about calories. You don't think about macros. You don't think about anything. You just eat them. And your brain, for one brief moment, goes absolutely electric with pleasure. That reaction, that little burst of joy, that's not a modern problem. That's not a social media thing. That's not because you skipped breakfast. That is one of the oldest feelings in human biology. And the fact that it now ends with you ordering a large at a drive-through window instead of climbing a cliff face covered in bees tells you everything about how far this story has traveled. Because here's the thing nobody asks. We talk about sugar like it's a modern invention. Like somebody in a lab coat one day said, "You know what this world needs?" And out came the white crystals. But that's not how it happened. Not even close. The real story starts hundreds of thousands of years before there was a single sugar farm on Earth. It starts with a brain that was built to chase sweetness, because for almost all of human existence, sweetness meant survival. So when did ancient humans first start eating sugar? The answer completely depends on what you mean by sugar. And once you understand the actual answer, you'll never look at a piece of fruit the same way again. Let's start with the thing most people get wrong, which is the image. When you hear ancient humans and sugar, you probably picture the wrong thing. You picture somebody deciding to eat something sweet, like it was a choice, a trend, a lifestyle decision. But humans didn't choose to love sweetness any more than they chose to breathe. The preference came first, baked into us long before we had any say in the matter. Here's why. Sweetness in nature almost always signals one thing: energy. Ripe fruit is sweet because it's loaded with carbohydrates. Honey is sweet because it's essentially concentrated calories. Dates are sweet because they're one of the most energy-dense foods a desert has to offer. And your brain, this incredibly hungry organ that burns through glucose like a furnace, is constantly, quietly scanning every bite you take for signs of fast fuel. A review in Nutrients lays it out plainly. Sweet taste has a biological role in identifying energy-containing foods, and sweet preference is especially strong in childhood, which is exactly when developing humans need the most reliable caloric signal. So your kid being obsessed with anything sweet isn't a parenting failure. It's ancient evolutionary programming doing its job. That's your fun fact for the next pediatrician appointment. You're welcome. National Geographic puts it simply: early humans sought out berries, fruits, and honey because sugar's high energy content helped survival when food was scarce. And food was scarce a lot. The idea that ancient humans had a sweet tooth the way we describe it now, as a weakness, a vice, something to manage, gets it completely backwards. A sweet tooth was an asset. It was the thing that pointed you toward the food worth risking your day for. Before there was a single sugar crystal, before there was a single farm, before there were bees in a box, ancient humans were eating natural sugars every chance they got. Wild berries, ripe fruit, honey, sweet roots, date-like fruits, plant sap, even breast milk contains lactose, which is a sugar. The very first thing any human ever tasted was sweet. That's not an accident, that's the whole design. But how far back does this actually go? Further than most people realize. And the evidence comes from a place nobody expected, inside the teeth of people who have been dead for 50,000 years. Okay, so here's where it gets genuinely interesting. In 2011, a team of researchers, Amanda Henry, Allison Brooks, and Dolores Piperno, published a study in PNAS that changed how we think about Neanderthal diets. They analyzed dental calculus, which is basically ancient hardened plaque, from Neanderthals at two sites: Shanidar Cave in Iraq, going back perhaps 50,000 years, and Spy Cave in Belgium, around 36,000 years old. And trapped inside that ancient plaque were phytoliths and starch grains, the microscopic fingerprints of plants. Among those plants, date palms, legumes, relatives of wheat and barley grasses. Now, dates aren't table sugar. Nobody's saying a Neanderthal had a sugar bowl and a tiny spoon. But dates are one of the most sugar-rich fruits on Earth. And the fact that Neanderthals in a cave in Iraq were eating them 50,000 years ago tells you something important. This sweet-seeking behavior isn't a modern human quirk. It's older than our species as we currently define it. The craving didn't start with us. We inherited it. A European Commission research article notes that some evidence for eating tubers and cereals goes back 40,000 years. And separately, a 2016 PNAS study found starch granules trapped in the dental calculus of Mesolithic foragers in the Balkans, dated somewhere between 6,600 and 5,900 years BC, showing consistent consumption of starchy, carbohydrate-rich plants. Starch isn't the same as table sugar, obviously, but the moment it hits your digestive system, your body converts it to glucose, which is exactly what your brain runs on. Your brain doesn't care about the packaging, it just wants the fuel. So you've got ancient humans and their close relatives, tens of thousands of years before civilization, already eating the foods that would give their brains the most fuel. Not because they read an article about it, because the ones who didn't seek out those foods had less energy, less capacity to hunt, travel, and raise children, and eventually just got outcompeted by the people who did. The craving was the survival strategy. And nowhere is that more obvious than with honey. If fruit was the everyday sugar of the ancient world, honey was the jackpot. It's basically the most concentrated natural sugar source a hunter-gatherer could find. And unlike fruit, which is seasonal and competitive and gets eaten by every bird and mammal in the vicinity, honey just sits there, inside a hive, waiting, defended only by the 10,000 bees trying to kill you, which somehow made it more appealing, apparently. A 2014 paper by Frank Marlowe and colleagues titled Honey, Hadza, Hunter-Gatherers and Human Evolution looked at the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer groups on Earth, to understand what ancient honey-seeking might have looked like. The findings are remarkable. According to Duke's Global Health Institute, the Hadza get about 15 to 20% of their calories from honey, one of the simplest, fastest-burning carbohydrate sources available, while maintaining genuinely strong health markers in traditional living conditions. A 2023 dietary analysis in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that honey provided more than 9% of calories in 6 out of 11 hunter-gatherer populations studied, including the Hadza, the Aceh, the Ife, the Batek, the Jarawas, and the Nukok. These are populations spread across different continents, different climates, different environments. The common thread is honey, ancient sugar. Everywhere you look, humans are going out of their way to get it. Different languages, different tools, different parts of the planet. Same move. Find the bees. Get the honey. Worth it. And they were climbing to do it. Literally. One of the most striking images in all of early human history is a piece of rock art from Cuevas de la Araña, the Spider Caves, in Bicorp, Spain. The image is estimated at around 8,000 years old, give or take a couple thousand depending on the analysis method, and it's been called by Atlas Obscura the oldest known surviving depiction of honey gathering. It shows a human figure suspended from what appears to be a rope or a ladder on a cliff face, hand reaching toward a wild hive, bees swarming, a basket in the other hand. Just take a moment with that image. 8,000 years ago, a person looked at a cliff, saw bees, saw honey, and thought, yes, absolutely, this is a reasonable plan for Tuesday. And another person thought, this is important enough to paint on a rock for everyone to see. That's not casual interest in sweetness, that's devotion. That is humans doing the Stone Age version of driving 45 minutes for the one bakery that does it right. But here's something even better. We don't only know about ancient honey hunting from paintings. We know it from chemistry. In 2015, a major study published in Nature, titled Widespread Exploitation of the Honeybee by Early Neolithic Farmers, reported something extraordinary. Researchers found secure chemical identifications of beeswax preserved in the lipid residues of prehistoric pottery vessels. A University College Dublin summary of the paper explains that the researchers traced bee product exploitation across Neolithic Europe, the Near East, and North Africa, finding evidence of continuous and in some regions probably extensive use going back to at least the 7th millennium BC. That's about 9,000 years ago. Honey itself doesn't preserve easily for thousands of years in a pot, but beeswax does. The wax molecules survive. So you end up with 9,000-year-old pots that are essentially still carrying the chemical signature of what was stored inside them, which is a very science way of saying the pot still remembers the honey. 9,000 years later. These pots have more staying power than most relationships. What that means practically is that by early farming times, people weren't just occasionally stumbling onto a hive. They were regularly, systematically using bee products, storing them, processing them, building them into the fabric of daily life. This was infrastructure, not an accident, not a lucky find, a planned part of how people ate. And a 2021 study in Nature Communications by Julie Dunn and colleagues found beeswax residues in pottery from West Africa, specifically from the Nok culture, dating back around 3,500 years. The University of Bristol summary notes that roughly 1/3 of the analyzed pottery vessels showed evidence of beeswax, suggesting honey or bee products were seriously important in that culture. This wasn't a European or Middle Eastern phenomenon. This was global. Wherever you find ancient humans settling down and making things, you tend to find them finding ways to store and use honey. Every continent, same instinct, same move, same sweet prize. But honey wasn't the only thing ancient humans were scaling cliffs and getting stung for. Dates were a completely different obsession, and the timeline on those goes back further than almost anyone expects. The Natural History Museum notes that stone tools and rock carvings from the Nafud Desert in northern Arabia suggest humans have been eating dates since the Middle Stone Age, around 200,000 years ago, according to Kew researcher Shahina Ghazanfar. Think about that number for a second, 200,000 years ago. Modern Homo sapiens is barely that old as a species. We were eating dates essentially from the moment we were us. Dates are extraordinary from a survival standpoint. They're sweet, calorie-dense, and crucially, they dry naturally. You can store a dried date for months. You can carry it across a desert. You can trade it. You can eat it when everything else has run out. In an environment where finding food at all is the primary daily challenge, a date palm isn't just a tree. It's a sugar delivery system with built-in long-term storage, no refrigeration required, designed by evolution, and then immediately exploited by every human who ever walked past one. Q also states that the date palm is one of the earliest domesticated fruit tree crops, with evidence placing first domestication in the Persian Gulf around 6,000 years ago. So you had a fruit that humans had been eating for possibly 200,000 years, and eventually someone thought, what if instead of finding the tree, we made the tree come to us? That is domestication. That is agriculture. That is the moment humans stopped chasing their sugar supply and started managing it, which is either the beginning of civilization or the beginning of a very long problem, depending on how you look at it. And then, around the same time as date domestication, something happened on an island in the Pacific that would eventually reshape every economy on Earth. About 8,000 years ago, in New Guinea and the nearby islands, somebody figured something out about a tall, woody grass. A 2025 analysis from CIRAD, reviewing a study published in Cell, examined genomic diversity from 390 representative accessions of sugarcane and confirmed it. Saccharum officinarum, the sugarcane species that eventually gave us every bag of sugar in every grocery store on the planet, was domesticated from its wild ancestor Saccharum robustum around 8,000 years ago in New Guinea. At first, nobody was making crystals. They were doing what was obvious, chewing the stalk. Bite into a piece of fresh sugarcane and your mouth fills with sweet juice, thick and intense, like someone distilled every ripe fruit you've ever eaten into a single hit. It's an experience. Early people in New Guinea weren't eating refined sugar. They were eating the cane directly, the way you'd eat a piece of fruit, except louder and stickier. And apparently they told everyone about it, because sugarcane spread everywhere. People in New Guinea figured this out 8,000 years ago and then essentially made it the Pacific's problem. The same CIRAD source notes that sugarcane diversification followed human movement, including a continental Asian center, developing around 3,000 years ago, and spread through Melanesian and Polynesian migrations between 3,500 and 500 years ago. People carried sugarcane with them across oceans. They brought it the way you'd bring something you genuinely couldn't imagine leaving behind. That is not the behavior of people treating something like a commodity. That's the behavior of people who found something extraordinary and refused to let the rest of the world go without it. Refined, crystallized sugar, the kind you'd actually recognize as sugar, came much later. According to the timeline most historians work from, crystallized sugar first appeared in India around 350 CE during the Gupta dynasty, and National Geographic notes that mass production of sugar didn't begin until 1647, which means for roughly 99.9% of the time humans have been seeking sweetness, there was no such thing as a bag of sugar. There was fruit, there was honey, there was cane juice, there was the occasional date that got you through another day. The version of sugar that now fills entire grocery store aisles is, in historical terms, about 10 minutes old. Now think about what this means for you personally. Because here's where it gets genuinely strange. You're walking around in a body that was built for scarcity. Your brain's reward system, the dopamine hit that National Geographic describes when you eat sugar, was calibrated in a world where sweetness was rare, seasonal, and worth a considerable amount of effort and bees to acquire. Your brain doesn't know that you live in an era where a supermarket has an entire aisle dedicated to the thing it evolved to chase. It just knows sweetness is here, it's signaling energy, and it wants more. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do. The environment just didn't get the memo. The ancient problem was finding sugar. You might go weeks between ripe fruit seasons. You might get stung 40 times climbing a cliff for half a basket of honey. Sweetness was intermittent and valuable, which is exactly why the reward felt so intense. National Geographic notes that after mass production began, sugar became part of a much larger and more constant modern diet, and that what used to be moderated by seasonal availability is now effectively unlimited. The brake that evolution built, scarcity, is gone. But the accelerator is still floored. The reward system that helped a Hadza hunter-gatherer scale a tree for a hive in Tanzania is the same system that now quietly nudges you toward the cookies in the cabinet at 11 p.m. It hasn't been updated. There wasn't time. 200,000 years of sweet-seeking instinct running on hardware that's never been patched for the modern environment. You are, in a very real sense, an ancient brain trapped in a Whole Foods. Here's what's honest. There are still things we don't know. We can see ancient plaque. We can read ancient pots. We can sequence genomes of 8,000-year-old sugarcane. But we can't always reconstruct exactly how much sweetness any individual ancient human ate, or how their bodies processed it, or what the transition from occasional wild sugar to regular farmed sugar really felt like physiologically across generations. Figuring out the diet of someone who lived 100,000 years ago is genuinely hard science, and the evidence is always incomplete. We work with what survived, and a lot didn't survive. We also don't fully understand why some modern humans seem more sensitive to sugar's reward effects than others. We know the dopamine pathways exist. We know the brain treats sweetness as valuable, but the full picture of individual variation, genetics, environment, and habit is still being worked out in labs right now. The ancient story is clearer than the modern one, which is a strange thing to say, but it's true. But the things we do know, they're enough to completely reframe every sugar craving you've ever had, starting with where you're standing right now. So go back to that forest. You're still there. The berries are still hanging in the sun. But now you know something different about the person reaching for them. They're not being weak. They're not failing at some imaginary ancient wellness plan. They're doing exactly what 200,000 years of selection pressure built them to do, seeking out the rarest, densest, most valuable energy the environment is offering. They're running the program their brain was built to run, the same one that sent Neanderthals in Iraq reaching for dates, that sent a person up a cliff in Spain into a swarm of bees for half a basket of honey, that sent entire populations carrying sugarcane across the Pacific because they found something too good to leave behind. The craving you feel when you smell something sweet, the way a ripe piece of fruit is somehow more appealing than a pile of raw grain, the fact that humans carried sugarcane across entire oceans because they couldn't stand the idea of traveling without it. None of that is a flaw in human design. It's the original feature. It's what got us through the lean seasons and the long migrations and the winters with nothing sweet in the world. The only thing that changed is the world around the instinct. The instinct stayed exactly where evolution put it. And somewhere right now in Tanzania, a Hadza hunter is climbing a tree for honey, getting absolutely annihilated by bees, and thinking, without any doubt whatsoever, that it is completely worth it.